afternoon, good morning, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. And one of the reasons why we are a failed state is that 44 years after independence, we are still failing to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And so for the last 44 years, the nation has been stuck with a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF regime. The regime believes that they own Zimbabwe's choicest fruit, the right of conquest. They would rather bend the whole country down than let anybody else rule it. Ever since the first elections, 1980, the Zanu PF made it abundantly clear that they would not allow the people of Zimbabwe to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. While at the Lancaster House talks, which ushered in the country's independence, the Zanu PF, like all the other parties at the talks, agreed that they would withdraw all their freedom fighters from the field to assembly points during the election period. They did not. Zanu PF withdrew some of its operatives to assembly points, but many of them remained in the field. Their instructions was very simple and clear. They were to tell the people, particularly in the rural areas, that if Zanu PF does not win the election, the bush war would continue. Of course, the people voted to end the bush war. Some people, soon after the elections, wanted to justify that that was just a campaign gimmick. They didn't mean it. But that disillusion ended in 1983 when the regime launched its now infamous Gukurahundi. The primary purpose of Gukurahundi was to force the only other political party in Zimbabwe that posed a serious political challenge to Zanu PF's power, PF SAPU, led by the late Dr. Joshua Nkomo. Mugabe's idea was to force Joshua Nkomo and his friends to give up PF SAPU and join Zanu PF. And they finally did that in 1987 when they signed the Unit Accord. And that cleared the deck to allow Zanu PF to impose the de facto one-party state that has ruled the country up to this day. There is no denying that Zanu PF honestly believe they have the right, the divine right, to rule the country. Ever since they got into power in 1980, the regime has set about systematically undermining the state institutions, private institutions, semi-private public institutions, undermining them so that they become Zanu PF departments in all but name. Particularly the army, the police, the CIO, the judiciary. They've all been serving one primary goal above all else, to make sure that Zanu PF retains power. The regime has rigged elections ever since. In 2008, SADC had made a concerted effort to get the regime to run what one would consider to be free, fair, and credible elections. In 2008 was the nearest the country has ever got to holding free, fair, and credible elections. And when the results were coming out, and it was clear Zanu PF was losing, Mnangagwa, who is today's president of Zimbabwe, stepped in, instructed ZEC to stop declaring the results. This is what he said himself, boasting about it.
In 2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya president. Ma-results abuda tiri party headquarters vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komogwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose watofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati ndomamira zvakaita takatodini kateda sei manje mama ndikati abvudzai baba nditaurira baba gadzirai politburo cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zivi gadzirai chi cabinet asi nangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 ma-results abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country we face a generational transition. Vana vesa vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess. Arusuru Faro. We know we are inheriting a mess. We know this country has been left with nothing.
I'm assuring you that starting from tomorrow, you'll see a different nation from what you have seen or read on the news about these results and everything. Where we are going ahead there, the situation will be very different. What we said to our people, they could not see with their own eyes. We're going to act as we see it fit. We're prepared to go the whole distance.
And so it happened. Mnangagwa organized with the police, the army, the CIO, prison services that year, and mounted some of the worst political violence that the country's ever seen during the runoff. The runoff, the primary purpose of the runoff was to punish people for having dared to reject Zanu PF in that election. Zimbabwe has yet to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Last year, Mnangagwa rigged those elections. SADC and the AU election observers condemned the process as flawed and illegal. And the regime, with its usual arrogance, went on attack mode. The chairman of the SADC election observer team, Dr. Neves Mumba of Zambia, became public enemy number one in Zimbabwe. The regime's apologists and propagandists all went after him. Here is what Mnangagwa himself said about the elections, last year's elections.
Vana vakatuka Zanu PF kana ini ndonyanyisa kufara ndokuita tiri kuita zvakanaka. Ukavona vavengi vakwashi kurumbidza nekuchikanganisa, ukavona vachiti Zanu PF yakaipa, farai, because you are doing correct things for your country. Hongu takaita maelections edu, kuna vamwe vaitaura zvisina musoro zvikanzi maelections anafamba zvakanaka, ndezvavo.
What is dismissing there, some of those who criticized the election process as flawed were none other than SADC and the AU. In the past, the European Union and most of the Western election observers had condemned Zimbabwe's elections as being flawed. Last year was different. The regional body SADC and the AU condemned the elections too, and the regime dismissed them. This is Mnangagwa publicly dismissing those who said the elections were not free, fair. That is their business. Brushing it all aside with the usual arrogance and contempt. We are stuck with a regime that honestly believe they have the divine right to rule the country. And they would rather burn down the country than let anybody else rule it. In a few days' time, there's going to be a SADC summit in Zimbabwe. And the regime has been on a warpath to make sure that no Zimbabweans should hold any public gathering in which they can demonstrate and protest that the regime rigged last year's elections. The whole purpose of this, turning the country into a North Korea type police state, is to make sure that no Zimbabwean will dare protest and remind SADC leaders that the regime is illegitimate. That is the only purpose of what we are seeing with all this military activity. The country is on a war footing. What I found really interesting is the sheer arrogance with which the regime continues to abuse the people and yet wants to portray itself as the adult in this relationship. Here is a video clip of the party spokesman, Chris Mnangagwa, comparing all those who were planning to hold the demonstrations during the SADC meeting to a naughty child.
Inini ndakakura naamai vanga vari strict. Ukati musuno yatete woita manyemwe wotaura zvemanga-manga uchitaura kuti atete vangu varipo. Amai vangu vanokuratidza kuti muyeni haupinimidze pamberi pemuyeni. All this time the CCC was quiet because they are disorganized. Now we have a major a diplomatic event which we have worked hard to host, which we are doing everything possible to look as spruced as ever, to look good. Amai vakugezesa kuti muonekwe zvakanaka naatete. Iwo wakusvika ipapo wakuti vanonditi vanonditi pamberi paatete. Amai vangu vanokutorera shamhu pamberi paatete ipapo vokushapura. Vabva futi atete vokurova futi kuti hazviitwi. This is mischief on the part of Chamisa. It has nothing to do with showing Democrats, because if he wanted to be democratic, he should have won the elections. If he wanted to be democratic, he would have sorted the mess in his party through democratic means. He didn't sort that out. How do you want to be democratic by demonstrating SADC when you are not democratic by running the affairs of your party on a day-to-day basis? It's mischief, and we are a party which fought a war. We know the pain of organization. We know the sacrifice of discipline in order to achieve certain ends. Don't try to taunt Zanu PF, because we've gone through worse things than before. And there is nothing for Zanu PF which is worse than a war. So we don't want to be taunted as a party. Kuda kufadza vayeni musi wavanouya. We will not allow it. Kupinimidza pamberi pevayeni, we will not allow it.
This is, of course, nonsense. The truth of the matter is that Zanu PF is behaving like the oppressive father who will come home drunk and the wife has got to wake up and warm his dinner. The children have got to wake up even in the middle of the night to ask him, how was your day? Whenever he is around, he throws his weight around. Even the dog and the cat is afraid of him. Even the baby, the mother knows that the baby, she will do everything to make sure that he's quiet. because he will slap the baby as if he's slapping an adult. This is Zanu PF. Mnangagwa is talking of a mother who disciplines a child. Well, Zanu PF is the oppressive father who disciplines, who terrorizes the whole family. The wife, the kid, the dogs, the cat, everybody's afraid of him. What we have here in Zanu PF is that transferred from a family setting to a government setting. The regime has got all the state powers and resources at its disposal to oppress the masses. And the people are totally helpless. It is ironic that Mnangagwa is dismissing Chamisa as we will beat him up because he's trying to show off while the visitors are here. The visitors whom he's talking about are SADC. They already know Zanu PF is oppressive. They already know all this hive of activity is for one purpose and one purpose only: to silence all dissent. Zambia's president, who was the one who appointed Dr. Nevers Mumba last year to observe Zimbabwe's elections, has already complained about Zanu PF's behavior. Mnangagwa has been to Russia complaining about Zambia becoming militarized and asking Russia for help. The main reason why he was complaining was that Zambia dared to appoint Dr. Nevers Mumba, who went on to come up with a critical election report. And that is the only basis for Zanu PF's complaining. There's no other reason for it. This is the regime we are talking about here. This is the regime that is determined to silence everybody, including Chamisa, the human rights activists, and SADC itself. The regime is intimidating everybody. It doesn't want to be criticized. I repeat, Zanu PF believes that they own Zimbabwe's choicest fruit by right of conquest. They fought the war of liberation, and that gives them the divine right to rule the country. We are looking at a situation here where wresting power from Zanu PF, as much as it is absolutely necessary, because as long as Zanu PF remains in power, Zimbabwe's economy will continue to nosedive. Zimbabwe is a failed state. So what can we do? I believe what we must do is get the reforms implemented so that we've got free, fair, and credible elections. This is indeed the advice that Dr. Mumba gave. And I think Zimbabweans must refer to it again and again as their reference point.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me be clear that the changing of any dynamic or situation in any of our African countries is a preserve of the citizens of that country, in this case, the Zimbabwean people. An election observation team goes there to support the process by observing and being able to release a statement of our observations that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we raised several issues of transparency and also the independence of the Electoral Commission and things which happen in many other countries, you know. But at the end of the day, once we produce the report and make it available to the Zimbabwean authorities and eventually to the Zimbabwean people, it really remains the preserve of the Zimbabwean people to fight for the freedoms that they need themselves and to correct those issues that have been observed. The reason why we have multiple observation missions is to ensure that, you know, there's a comparison, you know, taking place between the SADC report and the European Union report, the African Union report, and then they can see that those issues that repeat themselves in all these reports, it's up to the Zimbabwean people. And this is where I appeal to all political leaders, not only in Zimbabwe, especially the elections that are coming in Mozambique, that are coming in South Africa, in DRC. We have to make up our minds that, look, at the end of the day, once the people in the country are given an opportunity to monitor the elections, because they also monitor, it starts not during the day of the elections. They must make sure that the constitutional lacunas that can affect a good election are dealt with months before the election. And they must fight to ensure that there's a level playing field. They should never wait for the time when the election is taking place. They must also insist that the electoral commissions and the governments in those countries abide by international norms in holding democratic elections. And this fight must be more vicious before the election comes.
For the record, the opposition, Zimbabwe's opposition, had the opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU. They failed to implement even one token reform. Right now, ever since Dr. Mumba's report, the opposition, the few MPs that they've got still in parliament, they've done nothing to push for those reforms to be implemented. And worst of all, the opposition, whatever it is, will be participating in 2028 elections without even one token reform implemented. Last year, Chamisa lied to his followers that he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes to con them to participate in the flawed elections. And they participated in numbers. I believe that was one of the main reasons why SADC did not deny Zanu PF political legitimacy. I think we can see this happening in 2028. What can we do? I think at the present moment, there's very little we can do. We cannot get Zanu PF to implement reforms. Opposition is definitely not lifting a finger to get the reforms implemented. What we can do, however, is make sure that the opposition supporters are aware of the sheer futility of participating in these flawed elections. It is a pity that Zimbabwean electorate have turned out to be so naive and gullible that they would believe even an idiotic lie like I have plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. What matters is that people did believe the lie in their millions. Nearly 2 million Zimbabweans voted for Chamisa in last year's elections, according to SEC results. And we know that 3 to 4 million Zimbabweans in the diaspora cheered and applauded the process. That is one of our weaknesses. We keep participating in flawed elections that are so flawed, so illegal, that the logical thing to do is to withdraw. And yet we keep participating. More so after listening to an idiotic promise from the opposition. That is our problem. The number one priority, therefore, for 2028 is that the Triple C supporters must be persuaded, must be educated, so that they can see the sheer futility of participating in these flawed elections. The opposition themselves are participating out of greed. Make no mistake about that. It's just that their supporters don't see it. Even now, with the benefit of hindsight, they still do not see it. I go back to the original statement I made. The Zanu PF believe they owe Zimbabwe's choicest fruit by right of conquest. And they would rather burn the country down than let anyone else rule it. Wresting power from such a regime is not going to be easy, particularly given that the regime has got all the state machinery under its control. It's had 44 years to dig in and consolidate its hold on power. However, the political and economic reality on the ground is working in our favor. I believe the 29th May elections in South Africa have changed the situation considerably. Whilst ANC for the last 20 years had propped up the Zanu PF dictatorship, when that party failed to secure an absolute majority in the South African elections, their wings were cut. ANC is not going to support and prop up Zanu PF from now on. Well, it is very difficult, of course, in the interests of the regional body, SADC, for any SADC head of state to withdraw from participating in the SADC summit on 17th of August, in 6 days' time. It would have been good if they could, given the reality on the ground in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a police state. And the regime, as our friend here, Chris Mnangagwa, pointed out, is beating up all those who dare oppose the regime in the presence of SADC. And when SADC, the summit is over, it will conduct a follow-up as he threatened. Just to remind the people of Zimbabwe that Zanu PF rules. This is a regime, like I said, that is willing to bend the whole country down than let anybody else rule it. But we have fought for freedom and the right to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. We thought that with the independence, we will get that freedom and have that meaningful say in the governance of the country. That was not to be. And now we've got to fight the whole thing all over again. I think not fighting is not an option. When 50% of Zimbabweans are living in abject poverty, millions have left the country out of despair. That's either political refugees or economic refugees, or both. Zimbabwe's present situation is unsustainable. It is causing serious unrest in the whole region, not only in Zimbabwe alone, in the whole SADC region. And I think SADC leaders themselves also appreciate that. I repeat, our best chance of getting change in Zimbabwe is keeping our eyes fixed on the goal of making sure that Chamisa does not con his supporters to participate in 2028 elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. That should be our objective. Deny the regime the 2 million or so opposition supporters participating in these flawed elections, and you deny them oxygen. SADC would have denied Zanu PF political legitimacy last year if Zimbabweans had not participated in their millions in those elections. That is a fact. Thank you very much for those of you who were able to tune in. And have a good day.